large open fields, pearly white mountaintops, and an incredible Hitman map. The Sinnoh region is set in Hokkaido, Japan, home to Generation 4 of the Pokemon world, also known as the fan favourite, even though Generation 5 is 10 times better. But how does it hold up against the previous generations, and more importantly, Metagross's Gen 3 Mafia state? Let's find out. The rules are outlined in the previous 3 videos, so if you haven't seen them, go and watch them now. Anyway, as previously stated, Hokkaido, Japan is the setting of Generation 4, the Sinnoh region. Let's talk tactical advantage. Isolated on its own island, making it very defensively positioned, it could easily defend its own coastline with its own host of Pokemon that we will get into. It's also very close to Russia, which, to be fair, could either be a very good thing or an extremely catastrophic thing. Let's hope that Putin isn't a Gen 1er. But how will they protect themselves? Let's get into the nitty-gritty of it. Looking at Gen 4's Pokemon sparked my creativity, you could say. It looks like there's potential here for a lot of team-ups and ways that this region's Pokemon could form a cohesive army. So I say we start with the ground troops. Firstly, we have the swordsman, and we're starting off strong with Gallade. A master of courtesy and swordsmanship, it fights by extending swords on its elbows, like a weird Netflix adaptation of Wolverine, but a ridiculously cool one. Now, he only stands around 5 feet tall, but this army of short kings could do some serious damage. It states in the Pokédex that these Pokemon can sense what their foes are thinking, which is scarily similar to the mind-reading capabilities of Medicham from Gen 3, and we've already discussed that these Pokemon are scary mofos. This would provide a fantastic counter and would give birth to some incredible fight scenes. I'm still waiting on the TV deal. Netflix, you need to hit me up. Next to them stand Lucario, who can fire off mental waves with the capability of crushing boulders to dust. Good to know. To be fair, we've already gone through our fair share of Pokemon that can make boulders look like Blackpool Rock, but this Pokemon can do it with its mind. And did I also mention he has the worst client installed? No foe can remain invisible to Lucario since it can detect auras. Yeah, everyone used that excuse in the COD lobbies, mate. You're lying through your teeth. Hacks or no hacks though, he can hunt down and deal justice to just about anybody he comes across. However, these two Pokemon don't really provide much of a defense against the lightning-fast punches of a Breloom, for instance, or the Molten Man himself, Camerupt from Gen 3. Their strength lies in their honour, and their ability to help and assist the residents of the region, getting them to safety and saving lives. True valiant knights. This leads me to believe that Sinnoh is the last beacon of hope for humanity in this war. The true heroes, the main character, the Britain to Gen 3's Germany. I have further evidence for this down the line. Get prepared, it's coming. I'm back! I've got a haircut now and it's brighter. Why is it brighter in here? The best form of response that Sinnoh could provide is a tactical defense, starting with a wall of Bastion. Its terrifyingly tough face is harder than steel, and they use this heavily to their advantage. This is canonically how they protect their kids. They line up in a wall around them and just plant their faces in the ground, and this could be exploited heavily in war. Now, the actual strength of this monster of a face is definitely up for debate. The best comparison I could find is that it's as strong as diamond, but it's definitely worth mentioning here the difference between hardness and strength, as they do refer to 2 separate metrics. Strength is measuring how much stress you can put on an element before it permanently disfigures or like fractures, for instance, like a hydraulic press. Whereas hardness is referring to the material's resistance to hard blows from a hammer, for instance. And this is where it gets a bit interesting, because Bastion's face is as strong as diamond and as hard as steel. That is the worst of both worlds. Diamond is known for being the hardest element on the periodic table, whereas steel is known for being extremely strong. So if an attack like Rhydon's Horn came in that can crush diamonds, it's going to be extremely easy for it to overpower Bastion. Not really ideal. So now I would say for Sinnoh, the best play is to keep the wall of Bastion, but try and find a way to limit the Rhydon and the powerhouses from getting to the wall. Now, we might not have archers to sit behind the walls with arrows big enough to take out a Rhydon, but we do have other projectiles that are shot out by Rhyperior. It is said that it can shoot a rock out of its hand like a missile, and I am going to take this very literally literally. I'm going to graciously presume that this is not an ICBM or an intercontinental ballistic missile, because that would be wild. So instead, we're going to look at the slowest missile I could possibly find, which is a rocket-propelled grenade, or RPG, which travels at 294 meters a second, or 660 miles per hour. Now, Rhyperior doesn't actually fire missiles, obviously. He fires stone clumps, which introduces so many variables such as mass and other factors, and we wouldn't be able to calculate anything if this was the case. However, it's also stated that he occasionally fires Geodude or Roggenrola instead of the stone clumps. We can work with this. They both stand at 0.4 meters tall, and the heaviest of the two, Geodude, comes out to 20 kilograms of mass. It's time for some hardcore maths. We want to find the force that Rhyperior is putting onto this Geodude, which is mass times acceleration. We already have the mass of the RPG, but we need the acceleration. As you can see over here, acceleration is equal to the change in velocity over time, which means we need the time, which actually had me struggling for a bit, but we managed to figure it out. We know that the maximum distance of an RPG comes out to around 920 meters from the firing point, which means that we can use distance is equal to velocity divided by time. So if we rearrange the equation, we have time is equal to velocity divided by distance, which we've plugged in here, and it comes out to 0.32 seconds. That's not a lot of time. We can now plug this time into the acceleration formula, meaning that it comes out to an acceleration of 918.75 meters a second squared. Then the final step is we plug it into this formula, which comes out to for God's sake, that comes out to 18,372 newtons of force, which is equivalent to 4 times the punch strength of an elite heavyweight boxer, or around abouts. Now, that's not quite the punch force of Breloom, which comes out to about 311 times the strength of a heavyweight boxer, but I refuse to believe that Breloom can move fast enough to avoid an angry-looking rock travelling that fast. This will easily be enough power to stop any Rhydon from reaching the walls, especially if there's multiple Rhyperior sat behind this line of Bastion. Let's add some more defense though. To make it even easier for the defenders, we're going to place an army of Hippowdon in front of the wall. It can blast internally stored sand from ports on its body to create a towering twister, basically covering the entire area in a sandstorm. This will not only disorientate the incoming army, but it will also provide cover for yet another Pokemon to join the fray. Drapion, also known as the Sand Demon, yes, he's actually called that. He can tear foes apart, but prefers not to. He prefers to inject them with a lethal poison instead. So if they aren't completely disintegrated by a raging hippo with a 7-foot wide gape that can crush a car, they will have to face a Ogre Scorpion with the same crushing power. But how are Drapion going to see their opposition in the midst of this sandstorm? Well, introducing Luxray, otherwise known as Wall Hacks. It has eyes that can see through anything, and it can spot prey even behind walls. Alongside its hacking brother Lucario, they can work with the Drapion and the Hippowdon to search and destroy any threat that enters their sandstorm domain. But going even further, what about their water defense? Before they even step foot on Sinnoh's land, they're going to have to face some serious threats. Empoleon swims as fast as a jet boat, and its wings are sharp enough to cut through ice flows, or i.e. what sunk the fucking Titanic, or close to it anyway. Ice flows don't have the same mass as an iceberg, but drifting sheets of ice are certainly not as soft as butter. I'm imagining anyone that goes into the water with these beasts are going to be sliced up like string cheese before they even reach the beach. Good luck getting away from them, by the way. Jet boats can reach speeds of up to 130 miles an hour. I think I'd rather just jump in a bath of piranhas, thanks. But now let's talk some offensive capabilities. When they've been filled in on the war and they've recovered, they will come up with an incredible game plan to crush the tyrants that are the Hoenn region. It's time to go to war. We'll start off with the same sandstorm strategy to try and disorientate and confuse any sort of foe and mess up any game plan they have, but we will also introduce 2 new nuisances to the fray, being Mismagius and Rotom. Mismagius appears from nowhere, mutters incantations, places curses, and gives people terrifying visions, which breaks the morale even more. It also gives splitting headaches and hallucinations, which will possibly make the foes fight amongst themselves before they even get to the wall. Rotom, however, works in a slightly different way. He is literally made of plasma. Let me reiterate, you cannot touch him. He is a superheated gas, which means he could literally survive anywhere and fill out his devious duties by harassing random electronics. Any sort of technology that, let's say, Slowking has come up with for Generation 2's Pokemon could theoretically be turned back on themselves or just disabled. Plasma normally exists in extremely low pressure environments like the upper atmosphere, for example, or in extremely hot temperatures like a nuclear reactor, so it doesn't even matter if this is taking place on the sun, he is still winning. This could also technically be used to take over the Porygon space satellites from Gen 2, if you really want to go that deep, making it an especially potent threat. But then, the true assault begins, with a wave of Rampardos. These things destroy skyscrapers with a headbutt. They used to dig up fossils of this Pokemon and use their skulls as helmets. Don't tell Peter. A wave of these Rampardos running at you would not only take out the majority of threats, but if you saw that running at you, it would serve as a deterrent. You want to fucking run for the hills. After this Rampardos rampage, we're going to place the wall of Bastion again, allowing for troops further behind in the walls to be able to fire artillery strikes, but we'll get to that point. After this wall of Bastion, we're going to place a variety of troops that work together beautifully in union, starting first with the trappers. We have first Tangrowth, who ensnares prey using its long viney arms, which if they're cut off, by the way, they don't care. They grow back immediately. They will literally wrap you up in an attempt to suffocate you, and if that doesn't work, they'll just hold you in place, ready for the second trapper, which is slightly more sadistic. Licky Licky works in a similar way using its tongue, except this thing can extend up to 25 meters or 82 feet. What makes it slightly more sinister, however, is that the components of its saliva will literally dissolve anything, even more chemical warfare. Not only does it do this, however, but it also creates a numbness that does not fade, i.e. paralysis, permanently. Yeah, your Pokemon are strong, but what are they going to do when they've been immobilized by a soaking wet muscle? Now, sat behind this line are the big brutes, the ones who are going to take out any of the big threats that have managed to penetrate the system so far. We're talking the Dragonites, the Tyrannotars, the Salamancers. Electivire can unleash a voltage of 20,000 volts onto its opposition, which might sound like a lot, but we're missing some serious information here. Voltage means absolutely nothing if you don't simultaneously have a high current, because that's what deals the damage. The best way I can think of to describe voltage is by these two diagrams here. The more volts you have in a circuit, the more potential there is to push more energy, let's say. However, the current is how fast this flow is moving. These two systems could have the same current, and they would have the same flow of water. Even though this one has more potential power, it's the exact same if it has the same current. In the same breath, the more current you have, the faster the electrons are going to move in the circuit. So let's say, for example, 500 amps, it's going to be absolutely fucking massive. It's going to be so fast, compared to 5 amps, where it's just gonna drip out the system. That's the best way for me to describe it. Now, it says in the Pokédex that blue sparks appear between the antenna of Electivire during battle. So it's actually closer to 30,000 volts that this thing can produce, but we're still missing the current. That comes in this next insert. It states the amount of electrical energy Electivire can produce is proportional to the rate of its pulse. Now, if we presume that 1 beat per minute is equal to around 1 amp, and we say that the maximum heart rate this thing can have is about 200 beats per minute, which is about the average of a 20-year-old male, then after all that, we can assume you're 6 feet under. 200 amps is around 2,000 times more current than you need to kill a human being. In this scenario, voltage doesn't really matter. 75 volts is just about as fatal as 750 volts, so it could be 50,000 volts, and this would still suck ass for you. Now, for your heart to stop breathing, you need to receive a current between 0.1 and 0.2 amps. Why? Well, I'll let you know. Between these two currents, your heart will go into something called ventricular fibrillation. In other words, it's uncoordinated twitching of the walls of the heart's ventricles, which then causes you to die. What happens any higher than 0.2 amps is that your heart receives that stronger muscle contractions that it then clamps your heart during the shock. This then prevents you from going into ventricular fibrillation. However, this doesn't mean that you survive. Any higher than 0.2 amps and your body receives drastic burns and your breathing stops. This also gets a little bit more complicated since we don't know how long Electivire can put out that kind of current. If it's any longer than a couple of seconds, you're going to be fried from the inside out. Lightning is a great example of this. It sits at 300 million volts and 30,000 amps, and it still does irreparable damage to a human being, even though it only takes place in around 0.006 seconds. Pair this with the fact that electricity can chain between multiple targets, and you've got a being that can end thousands of lives on a whim. Next up though, we have Probopass, who is here for a very specific reason. Magnets. I love magnets. It's stated that it radiates such a powerful magnetic field that it renders all electrical devices in the area unusable. So basically, Metagross counter. Here's the plan. We've already stated that Metagross has control over a super powerful, superconductive electromagnet inside of its body. Gross. Probopass uses a similar system to control 3 mini heads, which it can control separately. As it stated, he can attack foes from 3 different directions. This means that Probopass has to possess the same power as Metagross to manipulate the poles and the intensity of its magnetic fields. This is extremely useful knowledge. Using this power theoretically, we could surround Metagross with enough Probopass to completely nullify its magnetic abilities. They would all be producing the exact opposite magnetic field that Metagross would create, basically rendering him completely useless. Now, we can't just use toxins to paralyze or sedate Metagross because he's made of metal. That just wouldn't work. Instead, whilst he's pinned, we use Electivire to shock him with deadly amounts of current. But wait, that doesn't work. Science lesson advanced. Shocking Metagross with even more power would just act like adding another battery in parallel to the circuit, therefore making him even more powerful. Magnetism is literally just moving electrical charge. In fact, even though magnetism and electricity are two completely different topics, they are intertwined. Just look, for example, at Coulomb's law. And yes, that is where I got the name for this channel. Congratulations, law unlocked. This, however, is absolutely being saved for its own video. 1, because I am wildly uneducated on the topic and I want to do it justice, and 2, I want you to subscribe so you can come back and see it when I eventually cover it. Wow, what a way to sneak that bad boy in. Anyway, we can't shock him. So let's melt him. Magmortar. It can blast fireballs of over 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit from its arms. That bitch is hot. Not exactly mag cargo or Camerupt hot, but it's hot enough to melt steel, which I'm presuming he's made of, by the way. It's literally his type. The melting point of steel is around 1,200 to 1,400 degrees Celsius, so this has to be the only way I can think of to deal with this threat efficiently. But Jesus Christ, this thing's a weapon. If you're unaware of why that is, you should have watched the previous episode, nerd. Anyway, moving on. Magmortar will also be living up to the mortar in his name. He will be raining down hot magma from the skies deep into the enemy backlines, hopefully dealing with any long-range threats that any other regions might have, because we haven't really got a counter to that yet. The final big boy we will cover today is Dusknoir, who has a mouth on its belly that it uses to swallow its target's whole. Just label the game as 16 already. It's clearly a 16. It also uses its antenna to communicate with the spirits of the afterlife and then command them to take people there. Basically, the Grim Reaper 2.0 that for some reason 14-year-olds can throw a ball at and capture. Now you might be thinking, what if it can't digest a Pokemon, like Metagross for example, who's literally just made of metal? Well, you're wrong. It doesn't even eat the body. The only thing Dusknoir eats is the soul. It discards the body, then flees the scene like a wanted criminal. This confirms that in close quarters, Dusknoir can handle any threat presented, completely tying off this ground assault. Now this is great if all things go to plan, but as we know, war doesn't always go to plan. But not to worry, Sinnoh has its backup plan. Introducing the Weathermen, specifically Abomasnow and Bronzong. Bronzong is a bit of a wild one. It is said, and I quote, "It brought rains by opening up portals from another world." Who needs legendaries? Hooper may as well have never bothered existing. If he can bring rain through these portals, what else else can he bring through? Is he bringing thunderstorms? Is he bringing whole-ass suns from other universes? Where do these things come from? Can he bring people? Is he going to be the Doctor Strange endgame of the Pokemon world? Because that would be pretty fucking poggers. But let's dial it back a bit and just say for now that it can only bring weather. Certain Pokemon, like Metagross for example, work better in different climates, such as the cold mountainous terrain. That's great and all, but oh wait, now it's colder in Portugal than it is here. Unlucky, bro. Abomasnow works in a similar way, but he's just more one-dimensional. It states that a shake of its massive body is enough to cause whiteout conditions, a druggy's wet dream. The weather has had a profound effect on many real-life wars, and I believe this to be no exception. They could be able to turn any scenario into a winning one. They could use it for defense, for offense, as a means of escape, or they could just use it to power up and shut down Pokemon as they please, the master technicians that they are. Finally, I want to tackle the one medium of warfare we haven't yet covered, that being the skies. And once again, Sinnoh is not caught lacking. Staraptor never stops attacking, even when it's injured. You can't instill that kind of mindset onto today's soldiers, no matter how much pension you're offering them. It can fly through the air carrying large objects, which could be used in a multitude of ways. Whether that be kidnapping the opposition like a Pelipper, or dropping in new troops or supplies, use your imagination, the floor is yours. In terms of more offense and less utility though, how about Yanmega? It prefers to battle by biting apart foes' heads instantly while flying at a high speed. Okay, and this game's rated a 3? After making my FBI agents extremely anxious, I can confirm that the human skull can withstand up to 6.5 gigapascals of pressure. That makes it 10 times stronger than steel. And this Pokemon chose that out of all things to chew on. He must be pretty hungry. That being said, your head and your torso have about 5,419 calories in them, so maybe he's onto something. Not to mention, of course, that beating its wings can dislodge fully grown trees accidentally. Sure, mate, there's absolutely nothing accidental about that. This means it can create 90-mile-per-hour winds with its wings. Biological wings. Fuck it, we don't need an offense. We can just blow them over. Then what are they going to do? Get up? Oh no, now you've got broken legs. Last but not least, we have, of course, the pseudo-legendary of the region, Garchomp. Cynthia's little bitch that caused me hours of frustration in Undella Town as a child. It flies at speeds equal to a jet fighter plane, i.e. this thing's breaking the sound barrier. Thankfully, the Pokédex gives me a reason to believe this thing can actually achieve such speeds, because at this point I've just been taking its word as gospel. Its fine scales don't just reduce wind resistance, I think you mean air resistance, but go on. Their sharp edges also cause damage to anyone who attacks them. Man's got thorns too on his chest plate, and he isn't afraid to show it. Now in Gen 1 we've already talked about the bomber birds that are Pidgeot, but this thing just comes in at a whole new level. If Garchomp can fly as fast as the fastest fighter jet that we have ever manufactured, which is the Lockheed YF-12, this would mean that Garchomp would be traveling at 2,274.8 miles an hour. That is 3 times the speed of sound, beating out Pidgeot by just casually traveling a whole nother speed of sound faster for bants. Not only this, but he is also 2 times as heavy as Pidgeot at 95 kilograms. This defies so many laws of physics that I feel slightly nauseous. All of these Pokemon combined with the tactical prowess of the region means that Sinnoh is certainly a dominant force in this war, but what sets them apart in my opinion is that they are dependent on the human race. Not only are they dependent, but they are also in favour of the human race. Someone has to come up with all of these tactics to make them such a powerful force, and they don't have the Metagross or Slowking of the previous regions, you know, a big scientist to help them do so. So in that case, in comes Professor Birch to sort it all out for them. The deep desire and connection with the Pokemon is enforced with Gallade and Lucario, who literally have things in their Pokedex stating that they want to have a connection with other people. It feels like I'm switching sides with every new video I make on this series, but yes, I am rooting for Sinnoh as of right now. I mean, they might be the last beacon of hope that humanity has in all of this. Does Gen 5 have anything else to bring to the table? Spoiler alert, yes they do, but you're going to have to wait until the next video to find out about that one. So cheers fellas, and goodbye.